Hey everybody, so based on the feedback of the LaFerrari video I did last week, I figured I'd give it a try again with a car of similar type, the Porsche 918. I really like this car. This is a really cool car. I like all three of the modern hypercars, but this one is just such an easy car to geek out over. In fact, there's so many things to talk about in this car that I've actually created about 3 pages worth of notes to go over and talk about. I've done that for 2 reasons. One is I drove the car long ago, in December, early December, and in, April? And secondly, I lost my notebook with all my notes about this car and everything else I've driven in the past year, which is a big bummer. Shows you how professional we are. So I first drove this car in early December in Spain at Circuit Ricardo Tormo, which is an F1 development circuit. Was there for a day and a half with basically unrestricted access to the car. I was there with a couple other video crews from around the world. I met Chris Harris there, really good guy, and it was a lot of fun. It was great times. We got the car in the US at our own stomping ground in April, and that's when we had the 959, and we'll go into all that later. But I've basically spent, of all these 3 cars, I've spent the most amount of time with the 918 and driven it in varying scenarios. So I really have an understanding of how this car drives, and that's great because I think it's the most complex of the 3. And this cutaway here could start showing you why. I just love cutaways. They're really cool. I could just look at them for an hour and really not tell you anything new, but just admire all the intricacies and the shapes within the car. And maybe go to the next one, start talking about architecture. Now, this isn't a presentation from Porsche. It's basically a bunch of images I've compiled off their media site and gone through some of my own research to talk about. So this isn't going to be as concise of a presentation as the Ferrari episode was, because I don't have a presentation to go off. I just sort of put together notes and images of stuff that I thought would be cool. But, hey, that's okay. So the 918's architecture is very similar starts similarly as the P1 and the LaFerrari. You have a carbon fiber tub, you have a gasoline engine with an electric motor on it, you have a twin clutch transmission, and on and on and on. But it's where things start getting different, where the car really starts getting interesting. So here you have the V8. Here you have the electric motor. It's actually in between the engine and the transmission, and then here's the twin clutch transmission. Up on the front, though, is where things get interesting. That is a motor on the front axle, and it isn't connected to the rear axle at all. There's no transfer case, there's no drive shaft, there's nothing connecting the front and rear axles except for the chassis and wires going to the battery pack. Now that makes for some really interesting ways to change how the car behaves in the corner, especially when you start considering this has rear steering, and it does some really interesting stuff mid-corner. And we'll talk about that a bit later when we get into the testing that we did on the car. But yeah, that's where the differences really start getting interesting. On the back, the transmission is the 7-speed PDK, the twin clutch gearbox, out of the 911 Turbo. It's modified, and it's actually upside down. And they did that to lower the center of gravity of the car, and there were a couple other tweaks they had to do once they were inside. So this is the outline of all the parts in the car. Basically everything you just saw on the last slide, just with a key to tell you what it is. Most importantly, you have the V8 high RPM engine and Porsche Doppelcup looks strong. God, that's that name. But yeah. So here is the chassis. So the interesting thing is Porsche's philosophy, one of the things they stressed in all the press materials, is that their philosophy of developing this kind of car is it needs to be drivable without bodywork. And when we start looking at the development mules, you'll see that's very much the case. So you have a carbon fiber tub, you have a carbon fiber engine cradle, and then aluminum crash structures on the front and the back. Now the carbon fiber tub because we went on about this in the Ferrari video, the carbon fiber tub is resin transfer molding, and so is the engine cradle. I did a bit of research and found out that the company that supplies this to Porsche is also the same company that supplies McLaren with all of its tubs. So it's interesting. They must be the de facto go-to company. It's Carbotech? I think Carbotech is the company. They must be the de facto go-to carbon fiber experts in Europe because Porsche and McLaren are using them. The structure is primarily RTM, but they do use a bit of pre-preg. They use a bit of materials throughout the car. Yeah, and then here you can see the four-wheel steering system on the back as well as those giant carbon ceramic brakes. There's a recurring theme in all three of these cars. Carbon fiber, carbon ceramic, twin clutch, and on and on. Going to be a sign of the future. So in the chassis, Porsche's stressing here that they use, in place of inserts for mounting points for the suspension for the powertrain, instead of using steel or aluminum, they're using carbon fiber. So the hard points that everything bolts up to inside the car is all carbon fiber. And they're bragging here this is the first time on a road car for the company. They've used them on Le Mans racing cars before that. The engine, I like this engine a lot. It's not big, but it does make a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful sound. It's a 4.6 liter V8 flat plane crank, and it's a real sweetheart. The cool thing is that there's no accessories on the engine. There's no belts. It's basically just connected to the motor. In fact, the electric motor is the starter. It decouples from the transmission and starts the engine when the engine needs to start. And when it does come on, it just goes boom, and it's on. It's just so quick. There's not much of a starting process or anything. It's a 4.6 liter V8. It doesn't make a lot of power relative to what else is out there in the market. You're dealing with 608 horse around there at 9150 RPM. It's a screamer. It really, really, really likes to rev and makes all of its power at top RPM, and you see that by the torque. Only 398 pound-feet of torque. I think Mustangs make more than that these days. The 608 horse, that means, I mean, the new McLaren 650S makes more than that. Hell, the new Z06 makes more than that. But those are all forced induction engines. For naturally aspirated engines, that's pretty fantastic. 608 horse, that's about, what, 130, I did the math, 132 horsepower per liter, which ties for horsepower per liter with the 458 Special, I think. And that's, I think, the most of any naturally aspirated engine, 458 Special aside. That's pretty cool. Now, the flat plane crank makes it sound like two inline fours running to 9150 RPM, and it's a very, very, very cool sound. I'm a sucker for it. I had an Integra GSR years ago, and I loved the sound of that thing once it was on the hot part of the VTEC. And the timbre of the sound, it's not the same, but it's similar. It has a bit more depth in the quality of it, but man, it sounds really, really, really good. So 608 horsepower. You have an electric motor that does 154 horsepower on that engine, and that's what powers the rear axle. And then the front motor is 127 horsepower. So combined 887 horsepower, which is close enough to 900 or even 1,000 that no one's gonna care if you round up. It's a lot of power, and it's totally on par with it's trust me, more than you could ever think you could ever need. We'll get into acceleration stuff testing later, but it's a hell of a powertrain. This is showing the connecting rod and all that, injector position and everything. 13.5 to 1 compression. Oh, and the engine, the concept of this engine, and is actually derived from the RS Spyder Le Mans race car. A lot of stuff coming from that car to this car, if the Spyder designation is any hint. So one of the cool things, in fact, probably my favorite thing about this engine, is that it's a hot V. So most V8s, the exhaust gases go out to each side of the engine, and the induction happens in the center of the V. Well, this is flipped. In this, the induction happens outside the V, and the exhaust comes out through the center of the V. and it means you have top pipes. The exhaust pipes go straight up out of the V and shoot up towards the sky. It's really cool, just from a sheer, like, just looking at it perspective. You're at the back of the car and you just see exhaust pipes sticking up. That's really cool. Top pipes are in the order of exhaust hierarchy. It goes top pipes, side pipes, normal tailpipes. I can't think of much cooler than that. The advantage here is that you don't have a lot of exhaust system to route. They've made this one out of Inconel, which is a very expensive lightweight material, and the total exhaust system is 64 pounds. And the exhaust system doesn't have to do much. Looking back at a couple stories that we did on this car, they did all their pass-by tests with the engine off because it has stop-start. I mean, in hybrid mode, which is something we'll talk about later, the engine will be off. And so the mufflers don't really have to muffle much. They can tune this basically to sound cool, and that's what they've done. Another advantage is venting all the hot gas through the center of the V keeps it away from the batteries. And batteries don't like heat. They like being cold. So the more heat you can get away from the batteries, the better the situation is. So this is the first, according to Porsche, this is the first hot V naturally aspirated engine out there. There's a couple turbocharged cars with hot V, but I just wonder why more cars don't have hot Vs. It's so cool. I hope it becomes more popular in the future. Also here I've converted the metric weights to good old Freedom America weights for my own comprehending. So there's both for everybody out there. So the exhaust cover, like, why would you care about the thing that covers the exhaust and the engine system? Because it's really cool. It's actually steel. Porsche says that they considered titanium, but after all the work they would have to do, this is their words, after all the work they would have to do to get the titanium system to meet all the heat requirements and all this stuff, it would actually weigh more than steel. So this steel mesh is, there's all these little holes that you can see. It looks like a mesh, and there are all these little holes, 7,346 holes with a WH. They all have to be individually laser cut. And the process of doing just this piece takes hours for all the treatment and stuff they have to do. Do I have more on that here? It's a very intricate thing. Yeah, it's when you get up close, you notice that the way the light hits it, there's a very cool look to the color of it, and that's all the treatment that they've done to that piece. So the fuel tank. Why is the fuel tank important? Why is the battery pack important? Well, there's a lot of energy content, a lot of energy potential in fuel and batteries, and they stay right behind the driver, and this is true for the P1 and the LaFerrari. So you want to make those areas durable. You want to make those areas resistant to any damage, and that's what they're talking about here. They also wanted to stress how lightweight everything else is in here, because the 918 is a rather heavy car, and we'll talk about that when we talk about what happened when we tested it. 18.5 gallons combined with the electrical range and all this stuff means you have a cruising range of over 400 miles, which is pretty good for your 900 horsepower super sports car that doesn't have a roof. I mean, that's pretty impressive. That's an EPA figure I'm roughly quoting, so I might be wrong too. Going next, the battery pack. There are, I have the number in here somewhere, 312 lithium-ion batteries in here. And the size of the battery pack isn't significant in terms of the whole automotive spectrum. The Accord Hybrid battery pack, as Kim Reynolds pointed out in his story on the car, is bigger. But the really interesting thing is the peak power discharge, 308 horsepower. So they've designed this battery pack to be able to discharge 100% of its power when needed. That's when you start getting into the hot lap mode on the dial. So they want to be able to quickly get all the energy out onto the tires to make you go fast. And then it can recharge not as aggressively, but pretty aggressive relative to other hybrids in the segment. So they've engineered this up for a quick discharge and quick recharge to make for more performance, better lap times, and all that. It's really interesting setup. While we're here, we can talk about Eevee Mode. It does have an Eevee mode. You can turn the dial and make the car run without any gasoline use. You get about, I think the claims are going from like 12 to 19 miles of range, of pure EV range, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things isn't great if you're looking at, you know, Prius plugins and so on. But for a 900 horsepower supercar, again, that's pretty cool. It's going to get you in and out of those European cities that are going to start requiring zero emissions. And you can also drive away under electric power from your house too, which is great if you don't want to piss off your neighbors, and that's a very important thing to consider. So here's more of the packaging. And again, I just love cutaways. I can just look at this forever. You look at the badges. They're really embracing, Porsche's really embracing the hybrid part of this car. And that's, you know, Ferrari's not. Ferrari's like, yeah, it has a motor, but it's not going to really advertise it. Here they've put e-hybrid in bright yellow-green, the same color as the calipers. They're really advertising, accentuating that stuff. I don't know if accentuating is the right word. Jumping around a bit to the interior. So the 918 interior is interesting because it's not a mess of carbon fiber. I'm kind of tired of seeing carbon fiber everywhere because I have the luxury of being in a lot of cars that have carbon fiber everywhere. I'm kind of getting tired of that design motif. I know I'm in a really different position than a lot of other people. So what they've done here is the dash is, everything inside the interior is carbon fiber. They've treated it with nickel layer, a copper layer, a brushed nickel layer, and chrome plating, and a fingerprint protection to make it not look like carbon fiber. And I like that. I just like that you can have that look like aluminum or something else entirely. Of course, if you like carbon fiber, there's nothing wrong with that. You can still order the car to have a carbon fiber look interior. And it's legit carbon fiber. It's not plastic sprayed to look like authentic stuff. It's the real deal. It's pretty neat that you have that option. The headlights. So these each weigh 1.9 pounds and are basically designed to be efficient in terms of electrical use. My favorite detail, though, are the 4 LED bulbs here. At dusk, when you have those on, it gives the car a really, really cool presence. I don't know why. It kind of makes me think of Le Mans cars. I'm probably thinking of a race car that had those 4 lights, but it looks really, really, really cool. That's basically what it comes down to. The charging system. So I've got the charge times here. If you have a 240 volt 30 amp, you're looking at 2 to 3 hours to charge the battery. If you've got 110 volt 10 amp, you got about 7 hours of charge time ahead of you. But you don't need to charge the batteries to drive the car. You can, like a Volt, you can turn on the car and just drive away, and the engine will charge the batteries. You can also, like the Volt, set the car in a charge mode where the engine just runs while the car's stationary to fill the batteries up as quick as possible. There's also a quick charge station you can use in conjunction with normal charging that reduces charge time to like 30 minutes or something like that. And it's pretty cool that you can get that. I just like being able to drive away in EV power. I remember when I got back from the first time driving the car, actually the first time I approached the car and started up, turned it on, and there was nothing. The car's just in gear. Put it in drive and just sort of whirred away. And there's all kinds of electrical noises, or not electrical noises, but hybrid noises. You hear motors, you hear the battery, you hear these high-pitched gear whine style sounds happening, and you hear the brakes chatter a bit. But there's something really cool about it that I can't quite put my finger on. In fact, if you look at the ignition video we did in Spain, and that section where I drive the car away in electricity and start giggling, that was literally the first time that I had driven the car under electric power, and that reaction was completely authentic. I just thought it was so cool to be able to drive the car that way. And of course you step on the throttle and the engine kicks right on and away you go. Aerodynamics. Again, jumping around a bit, but this car has active aerodynamics, which is going to be kind of the par for the course going for the future. This graph here shows the breadth that this car is trying to accomplish. You can pretty much describe the car in this graph here of everything that it's trying to do. And it's trying to do everything. So you've got downforce here, and you've got drag coefficient here. This A to B shows the Carrera GT in terms of what it's doing. Here's this plus sign is the 997 GT3, and then here's the various settings for the 918. You have an efficiency mode, and this all happens automatically, but you have an efficiency mode that reduces drag as much as possible to make the car more efficient when you're driving it. You have a speed mode, which is for top speed, essentially, and this thing does top speed of about 214, they're claiming. Haven't tested it, can't really find a place to test it, but I'll believe them because, hey, once you're at 190, who cares? And then you have a performance setting for max downforce. And if you look at little graphs here, the interesting thing is on speed to performance, the height of the wing stays the same, but the angle of the attack changes quite a bit to give you a bit more downforce. Other interesting things is the nose looks rather plain. There's no dive planes, there's no lips, there's no flaps or anything like that. And that's because Porsche says the underbody flaps that they have are just as efficient, or just not just as efficient, just as effective, but don't give you any penalties with a drag. And so that's why they've employed them here. What's an aero? Oh, this does not have an aero brake, so when you jump on the brakes, you don't see the wing flap up. Porsche said it's not necessary, that they can get enough braking force with the setup that they don't need any sort of aerodynamic advantage to get out of the car. Our testing 60 to 0 and 94 feet. Whether you're actually going to get any aero advantage at 60 miles an hour, you know, probably not, but 94 feet's like the second, if not third best 60 to 0 braking performance we've ever recorded. The faster, or the better one was like a Corvette Z06 on cup tires, and that thing did like 93 feet, and that thing's lighter, and I think it has a lot more tire than this. So here's how the rear wing actuates, and this is supposed to be an animation. Unfortunately, I don't have, because this is just a JPEG. So it'd be cool to see that. It looks cool in practice. And you can hard park. You can push the button and have all the wings deploy. Very crucial part if you're going to Cars and Coffee again. Now we get into weight. The 918 is a heavy car. When we had it on our scales, it was 3,791 pounds. 3,791 pounds, split 43% front, 57% rear. That's a lot. The LaFerrari and the P1 are claiming to be about 500 pounds lighter than that, although we don't really trust claimed weights, especially from Italian automakers. So we'll have to wait till we get those cars on our scales to validate that stuff. But, you know, this is a heavy car, as you'd expect. It's got four-wheel steering. It's got a front motor. Electric motor on the front. There are more things happening in this car, and it's just heavier. So this is showing how much attention they paid to weight, and this is kind of where you get into the YSOC package, the $92,000 option, $84,000 option, their package that reduces weight. So again, I've converted some of the kilogram figures to pounds to make it easier to quickly change if you're in America and you use these measurements. Interesting stuff is paint. You can get this car with foil instead of paint, and doing so saves 5.1 pounds. And this is probably where it's going to get interesting for potential buyers of this car, because you know, you're going to buy this car. A lot of people who are going to buy this car are sadly not going to drive it as much as they should, because this is a great driving car. You know, some people are buying it looking for investment. So what do you do if you're an investor? Do you get the foil with like the Gulf livery or whatever, matte black? It looks really good in matte black. Or do you get like this $63,000 liquid metal paint job? $63,000? Whoa, right? That's a lot of money. There is a $63,000. There's two $63,000 paint jobs for this car. They're liquid metal. One's gray, and I think one's bluish, and they look spectacular in person. They're really rich depth. They're almost flat, but they still have the sheen, the color changes. Okay, why are they $63,000? And it's because it's a crazy manual intensive process to get it to look that way. As I understand it, that paint job is all layer. There's some key things. There's 9 coats they put on the car of paint. There's 3 manual processes that people have to actually operate. Apparently magnets are involved too to get the flake in the paint to line up a specific way. And there's three clear coats on top of that. And there's some special buffing process too, I'm sure, that happens in Stuttgart. It's crazy, and it's a lot of money, but it looks great. So the question is, if you're buying this car as an investment, of course, I'd get Weissach package because that's the utmost performance version of the car. But do you get the paint or do you get the foil? And I don't know. I really don't know. And I'd love to be in a position where I have to make that decision, because how fortunate could you be? But that'd be a really interesting decision to be forced to make. And I don't know. And I wouldn't criticize going either way on the car. I especially wouldn't criticize somebody spending $63,000 on a paint job, because if you're lucky enough to be in that position to make that decision, like, good for you. That's great. And I could totally see it being worthwhile, especially when you're buying $1 million car. Other interesting things: the magnesium wheels are 30 pounds, and are 30 pounds lighter than the standard wheels. And when I was in Spain, they had a wheel just sitting there, one of the magnesium wheels, and you can literally pick them up with your fingertips. I mean, they are so light. I was thinking about just tossing them back and forth with Anthony, our videographer out there, just because they're like ridiculously light. It's kind of crazy. Wheel bearings are ceramic. You get into really the minutia of the detail, like saving 3 pounds on titanium brake backing plates, and so on, just to get as much weight out of the car as possible. And you do that when you have a car that weighs this much, and that's what Porsche is really focusing on here. This gets into the whole Weissach package. I've read different things on the weight difference on Weissach package, from 88 pounds to 93 pounds or something like that, maybe 70 pounds, I forget. But it cuts quite a bit of weight out, and you lose a lot of creature comfort too. You lose your door handles. Instead, you have poles like the Boxster Spyder does. You've got the magnesium wheels. You've got the different wraps that are available. You've got Alcantara instead of leather, and you've got carbon fiber everywhere. That's going to do that for that presentation. It's a bit shorter than the Ferraris, again, because I don't have as much detail to go on, but I can start talking about the visuals of the car. Of the three, this isn't the best representation here because I don't really like that foil design, but of the three, this is my favorite looking one of the three. In person, you can't take your eyes off this car. It is absolutely gorgeous, and it's gorgeous both in detail, like the LaFerrari, but also as an entire package. In person, it is just absolutely stunning. The big flap here from the side profile looks like a big rear end is eating a smaller car. It's pretty cool. But everything about the way this car looks, I'm just in love with. Here's the mesh over the rear, the exhaust covers, and you can see those hexagon shapes. And you can't flip this up like you can the LaFerraris. You basically just look through the holes to see the engine. When we had the car in April, we were testing it. There was a Porsche tech with us, and somebody asked, like, what happens if it's raining? And Porsche tech said, yeah, you don't drive this car in the rain, because these are all just holes that go straight into the engine. So those are the magnesium wheels, carbon ceramic brakes, Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s, and that E-Hybrid logo. I just love the shape. The shape is really cool. Even these cutout there. That cutout there is really nice. Close up on the wheel and brakes. So I love that you can take the roof off this car. I love roadsters. I love Spyders. I love convertibles. I love being open when I'm driving, because you get such more of an experience from driving the car, in my opinion. If you disagree, that's fine. Everybody's in right to their opinion. So the Porsche gets cool points for being able to take the roof off, just for that alone. When you take the roof off, though, you store it. It's 2 panels. You take them off. There's just 2 locking mechanisms. You take those off and you store them in the frunk, I guess you would call it. And then in there is this little guy. This is all carbon fiber. You pop this out and you slam it in the top of the windshield, and supposedly it's there to help reduce interior noise. And it kind of looks kind of dopey or dorky, but if it works, it works. There you go. The advantage, though, of having the roof off is, of course, those exhaust pipes that are about a foot or two away from your head. And when you're on the throttle doing gear changes with the roof off, it's like nothing else. You will start giggling because the sound is so awesome. And this is actually the liquid metal paint. And it looks silver here in person. It looks grayish. The wheel design, I don't like this wheel design as much as I like the magnesium wheel design, but it still looks interesting. Not to say it's ugly. I think it's really cool looking. The carbon fiber rear splitter. I wish we had more rear shots of this car because the stuff from the back looks really cool too. Those are the 4 lights that I was talking about in that one slide. Excuse me. Wow. At night, at dusk, these look really amazing. See these in your rearview mirror. Looks like something from a different planet. These are the tail lights. This is where the spoiler comes down on top. This is all fairly obvious stuff. This is the Martini Racing Edition, setting the Nürburgring lap time of whatever, under 7 minutes. Going over Flugplatz, I think the name is. 2 tires up. Pretty cool. It's got to be a good feeling. And then here is the liquid metal Spyder drifting. 918 doesn't like drifting. I'm not a great drifter. I'm decent at it. There are a lot of people out there in the industry who are a lot better than I am. I spun this car quite a bit. I don't spin cars often, but I spun this car. We were trying to get the drift shots of it. I spun it a lot. But when it is sliding, it looks cool. The car doesn't want to slide. It wants, as soon as that tracked rear end breaks loose, the car wants to come right around on you. I mean, you can get a little bit of slip, but I mean like trying to get a big, full-on, big angle drift. It doesn't do it as readily as the LaFerrari or the P1 does. But that's okay. I probably wouldn't want to drift this car if I owned it anyway, because that's not what the car wants to do. It wants to go fast, and drifting's not fast, although it looks cool. It looks great in video, too. Yeah, it does look good drifting. Yeah. And then here's that side angle I was talking about. You really, when you're in person, that side vent really looks dramatic on the car, but just the proportions, the shape looks so cool too. Even with the roof off, I just can't stress enough how great this car looks. We're back to the beginning. So, talking about being able to drive the car without bodywork, here's the development mule. Years ago, when we shot the first episode of what ended up being the first episode of Ignition on the Aventador, we were at the Nardo test circuit. And that was 3 years ago or so. And when we were there, this car was running around with a Carrera GT behind it. This exact car here. And it just looks so freaky. I mean, this looks like a science project, but it's so cool too. When I drove the car in Spain, they had this car there, and I just kept geeking out. I love Frankenstein, crazy, weird cars. I love the way this stuff looks. I wish you could just buy this. I'd totally rock that, because it just looks like if Roadkill did $1 million hypercar. Here's the tub again with nothing attached, no crash structure, no rear cradle. Here's a night. Look at all those computers and wires and stuff, all carbon fiber. And I could not get enough of this car. It just looks like something else. It's so cool. So the interior. These are glamour shots, so everything's going to look great. I think this might actually be the car that I drove too, because I drove the same car in Spain and in the US. I haven't driven a Weissach package car, which is a bit of a bummer. I don't think there are any in the US for press to drive. I'm sure a lot of people are buying them. And so if you're watching this and you're an owner of a Weissach package car, get in touch with me, because I'd love to drive it just for the sake of my own amusement. So the bucket seats come in 2 or 3 flavors. I forget. Neither, or the one that I was in was not very comfortable. It pressed, I mean, the seat back is fine. you can't recline it. It's a fixed seat back, but the shoulders, it pressed my shoulders out a bit much, and it wasn't terrible. It just wasn't ideal. The steering wheel goes up and down, doesn't come in and out, and that made setting the ideal like visibility kind of difficult. I'd either see Speedo or I'd see TAC, or one or the other. I couldn't get both, but minor stuff. More interestingly is what this interior says for the future of Porsche. And going by Porsche's history, looking at the 959 especially, what they do with their once every decade cars pretty much spells out the next 2 decades of vehicle development for the company. So from that we can tell you that, you know, the next 911 Turbo is likely going to be a hybrid. It's likely going to have electric motors. You're going to see a lot more carbon fiber. You're going to see a lot of the ideas and concepts from this car in the rest of the Porsche lineup. And that means we're also going to see this interior styling and probably this center stack in a lot of new Porsches. I was explaining that to Kim Reynolds, our testing director. I looked at that center stack and he said, wow, it doesn't really bode well for the future of the manual transmission. And I said, you're right, it doesn't. I can see in the future, maybe in 5 if not 10 years, there will probably be no Porsches with available manuals. I mean, that's just a total guess, but I'd say it's not out of the realm of possibility. As much as I like driving a manual transmission, the automatics these days are pretty much better in every way, except for the feedback that you get from moving a lever. And that's fun in the right car. I think asking for a manual in this car would be kind of crazy, because the automatics just so good. In fact, this car is so good at going fast that you don't feel it. It's bizarre, because you don't want to call it slow, because it's not. You know you're going fast, but it's deceiving. The stability of the car, the confidence it gives you, the overall control you feel like you have over the car, leads you to believe you're not going that fast, and you are going really, really fast. I mentioned back in my drive story for this car that I brought this up with Timo Kluk, who is one of Porsche's development drivers. He did lapping on the Nürburgring, and as soon as I mentioned, like, man, I don't feel like I'm going as fast as I am, he was like, yes. This, when they were shooting the advertising piece for Porsche on this car, there was a helicopter chasing him, and the helicopter had a radio to him to tell him to slow down because he didn't realize how fast it was going. And I can imagine that you hear that, you might think, well, I want to feel like I'm going fast. It's interesting because it's not thinking you're going, not realizing how fast you're going doesn't take away from the fun of driving this car. The experience of driving this car is still very, very satisfying. And what that gives you, that absence of fear in the speed of the thing, it gives you the confidence to push it really, really hard. My first 2 laps of this car around that track in Spain, I felt like I was up to speed, and I wasn't. There's a lot of performance I was leaving on the table, but it was a rewarding enough experience for me as a, somewhat experienced driver, that I was having a great time behind the wheel of this car. It's really cool. This center stack here, especially this top glass area, functions like an iPhone. I think it's actually the same glass that's on a current iPhone. I have to double check. Where my mouse is right now, you swipe across that with your thumb to change whatever's on the screen there. These aren't buttons. These are all, you tap it with your finger and it operates. Up here you have the front axle lift system, which is an option. You have the sport suspension, and you have the wing and traction stability control off right there. This screen right here changes depending on what you're looking at, of course, whether it's audio functions. When it's a map, it's this entire area is the map, and it's not a square or rectangular shape. It's a complex shape, and it's cool when that map is there because it gives you a lot of visibility. This is the drive, reverse, neutral, parking brake selector, and it's pretty much like a Prius. I mean, it's like metal material when you're operating it, but the function's pretty much the same. This is the drive mode selector. Economy, hybrid, sport, race, hot lap are the various settings for it. I think the car keys up in hybrid mode, and that means hybrid mode is electric power until you ask for a certain amount of throttle, and then the engine comes on, and then when you lift, it goes off. And it's pretty cool. This car doesn't have a sound generator when you're in Eevee mode, like some new Eevee cars are getting to announce to pedestrians when you're coming by. But a couple times when I was at the pits in Spain, there'd be people standing in front of the car, and I was driving along in hybrid mode. I just blipped the throttle, the engine would come on, and people would literally jump out of the way because here comes this massive, and people would move out of the way. It was pretty funny. I'm sorry, that's not economy, that's Eevee mode, my mistake. And that's your full electric mode when you're driving the car. I don't know if I mentioned already, but Eevee mode acceleration to 60 is like 7 seconds, and it feels fine. I mean, like, it works great. I really enjoyed. I was pleasantly surprised at how it drove with the engine off. Sport mode is probably how most people are going to drive it up and down Malibu with the loud exhausts and stuff. Those exhausts, by the way, at dusk do shoot flames. Not as much as the P1s, but yeah, there's blue pops coming out of the top that look cool. And then race mode is your track mode. The hot lap mode, when you press that, you activate it, that diverts 100% of the battery's resources on throttle presses. And this is where driving the car quickly gets interesting, because you have to plan. I mentioned this in the Ferrari video. You have to plan for straights. If you're on a track that has multiple long straights that tax the powertrain, you have to anticipate those. And so what that meant for us at Willow Springs is, okay, Randy, you're going to go out and you're going to do a charge-up lap in race or sport in a high gear to make sure the battery's at full potential. And then whatever straight's going to be the fastest, longest, most, where you want to use the most energy, that's when you want to activate the hot lap. And that's where it's going to get you through that track the fastest. It adds a sort of meta strategy to the track experience if you're going for lap times. And again, that's just if you're going for lap times. If you're just driving fast, like, it doesn't matter. But if you're going for lap times, which I don't imagine a lot of these cars are, you do have to think about that stuff, because you don't want to be on a straight and have no battery and have the engine be trying to power the car and charge the battery, because it slows the car down. Like the LaFerrari and like the P1, the engine can generate additional power to charge the battery when the car doesn't need that power to send the car forward. So it's another way they're scavenging power to get back into the battery. Cruise control, manual mode selector, and I think that is like the trip reset button. You can use your Bluetooth, of course, and that's going to scroll. I think that's a metal knob too. That was really nice. The tactile sensation on that was really cool. It was kind of hard to use these buttons. They weren't in a great place. I'll probably see a redevelopment of that. I could probably see continued development of that before it ends up in the regular 911 or so on. Another interesting thing I picked out of Frank Marcus's story is that this thing doesn't have an AM radio. I guess, you probably see the demise of that if this car's an indication. Gauges. Analog gauges, and who doesn't love a 9,000 RPM red line? Depending on what number this car is, you'll see that right there. And that's configurable. You can change that to show a few different things. They're making 918 of those, which isn't double, but it's close enough to P1 and LaFerrari production. And they're charging quite a bit less money. This is, what, 800,000, 900,000 versus 1.3, 1.2 for those two cars. So, I mean, it's kind of an outlier versus those two. But we can talk about those comparisons at another time. Digital Speedo, which I always love, and you have a analog one or digital one here. It's digital, and then a multi-configurable display here as well. Gas gauge, state of charge right here, and that's back to the beginning. The production. These cars are built in Stuttgart. They're assembled there at Porsche's factory there, and all I really wanted to look at in this photo was this flat gray or this flat black 918. Doesn't that look real mean? It's a Weissach package. You can tell by the exposed carbon roof and these flaps right here. But man, it looks good in flat black. If I had one of these, I'd get it in that flat black and never wash it. That'd be a real mean looking car. These are all press photos, so everybody's gonna look real happy about their door that they're putting together and the hub or how they're mounting the rotor on. But man, doesn't that look good in flat black? It looks real mean. There's the engine unit. God, those pipes look cool. And the stuff I pulled off my iPhone, that's us in Spain at Ricardo Tormo. I posted some of these on Instagram, so again, apologies for the repeats, apologies for blurriness, and so on. When we were there, they had a Carrera GT, a 959, and an RS Spyder on site. Couldn't drive them, but they were there. They were showing, the history of cool Porsches. The Carrera GT, this one had a bunch of oil underneath it, which is kind of a bummer. These are all Porsche museum cars, and so they're, working on fixing them. Really interesting to get up and close to this car, though. See the insides, go back and forth with the 918 in this, and see how much Porsche's changed. This is a very different car in concept. I mean, this is a total way driver-focused experience. Really raw, really visceral. You can see that in the way everything's laid out in the car. Randy Pope said the 918 was much nicer to its driver than the Carrera GT was. He's driven them both. And there's the RS Spyder. A lot of concepts from this car ended up on the 918. That's a very neat car. And then the 959. I love the 959. I mean, I'm a sucker for really kind of dopey looking 80s sports cars and supercars. And this one really just takes the cake. I mean, it's just so bizarre looking, but just such a cool car. And that's the first time I actually sat in one, was here in Spain. And it was really cool to see how far inboard the seats are, all the different gauges and stuff. Seeing all that tech for the first time in person was really neat. And there's the 918. That's the one we drove. There were a handful of cars there, including a Weissach package car at this press event. And it was a real great time. So why is Anthony so excited about the camera gear? Well, when we landed in Spain, they confiscated all of our gear because Spanish security is Spanish security, and it was gone for about a day. So we didn't think we were actually going to be able to film the episode that we eventually did, and when it came back, when we finally got it, we were ecstatic, because that meant we could film a really cool episode. And the episode that came out of that, our 100th episode of Ignition, was great. So one of the things that they required while driving the 918 on the track, and they required this for all press, is that whoever was driving the 918 had to follow a 911 Turbo driven by Porsche's hot shoes. And that meant, I think that was Timo Kluk was with us the whole time. So he's in the 911 Turbo S in front of me. I'm in the 918. And, they do that to slow you down, because the 918 is such a fast car, you can get yourself in real trouble if you're not prepared. But, I mean, I was so close on that 911 Turbo, and whoever was in it when I was following them for this picture was just sliding it through all the corners, slowing us down, but making a great smoke show. That was very exciting to watch. And I was so close that when I got out of the car after I was done, looked at the hood, and the hood was just covered with rubber from the tire smoke, which is pretty fun. Of course, a 900 horsepower car is going to be able to stay on the bumper of a 500 horsepower or 600 horsepower car. But it was a good way to get up to speed quickly, learn the line of the track and all that. And, that stuff came together pretty nicely. With the wing up, yeah, it looks real good. And from the back, another one, just because I love those top pipes. I think that's so cool. Yeah. It's a great looking car. This thing is wonderful. I was talking earlier about drifting. That was the big drift shot that we used for the video. That ended up being a slide. I totally spun it right there. I have no problem admitting that. But man, it looks cool before the spin, doesn't it? So why is there a 22B in this photo album? Well, just on a personal note, I came back from the 918 drive, wrote the story, sent that in. Then later that week, we shot the ignition episode on the 22B, which was, I mean, this has always been one of my favorite cars of all time, and that was a really cool experience. And then at the end of that week, I met this guy, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was doing our production company at the office is working on Cosmos, and so I got to meet one of my personal heroes because he was there shooting some stuff for him, and he was really cool. He doesn't know much about cars. He came over to the 22B and said, like, what is this? So I got to tell him about rallying and Subaru's history there, which was pretty cool. Super nice guy. I hope to run into him again, and if you're not watching Cosmos, you should, because it's great. So I mentioned later in April we got the 918 back, and was able to find an owner nice enough to drive up their 959 and meet us at Big Willow for the day with it. The 959 is a Canepa car. So Bruce Canepa is a U.S. guy who basically does a packaged bit of installation modifications to these cars, and it's pretty funny because all the stuff that the 959 was so forward-thinking in its time for. So you have adjustable height suspension. You have wheels with hollow spokes, because when you put the tire on and fill it, the air goes into the spokes. So if you crack a wheel, the TPMS system will alert you that, hey, you got a cracked spoke. TPMS was also a first in this car. Sequential turbos, one lights up the other, and on and on and on. The Canepa modifications do away with all of that and make it stuff that's simple and that it works, and I think that's why they do it, is because a lot of that stuff, 80s tech, isn't, you know, the best these days. So putting more reliable, simpler components in there make the cars run. Really kind of screwed up the story I was trying to push, though, because we were emphasizing all that tech back in the 80s was so innovative. Let's say innovative. And this car had none of it. It had all been removed in favor of simpler, tried and true stuff, but it was pretty funny. I didn't get to drive the 959, unfortunately. I got to sit in it while Randy Popes drove it, but it's still such a cool car, such an icon of that time. And it's such strange because you can't think nothing like that will ever be done again. And even the 918, as cool as it is, it's just not as weird as the 959. I think a lot of that weirdness is what makes the 959 the 959. 918 is similar in the concepts of its execution, but just not the weirdness. I don't think you could pass off the kind of design that the 959 had in the 80s. If there was somebody to bring that forward, I don't think you could. It'd have to look good, which the 918 does. On lap times, Randy drove the 918, and you know, Randy's been racing cars since I was born, literally. And once he's done his first hot lap session, he broke every production car record we could possibly find. And he calls us over, and he whispers, and he says, there's a lot of weird shit happening in this car. Part of that is this is a development mule, and not all the bugs were worked out. There was some braking issue stuff. There was some stuff later. The front axle lift system stopped working on us later at the point, but you know, it's a development car. It's going to have these issues. But he really had to adapt to the way the different powertrains, the way the various powertrains were deciding how to send power and how to move the car around, how to manage the battery system, what the car was trying to do. That takes some adaptation if you're trying to set lap times. If you're driving the car on the freaking limit, it does take some understanding of what the car wants to do. It doesn't have that linearity that the LaFerrari has. There's a lot of stuff happening. It's all really interesting stuff, and I don't think it's it takes away from the experience. It just adds something you have to consider to it. This is still a really nicely balanced, easy to drive, really fun car that just takes some extra thought if you're trying to set a lap time, which we eventually did. Our lap time was 1:23.54. And the same day we had a 911 50th anniversary there, and Randy did a 128.93. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 5 seconds between the two at Big Willow. That's huge. And we couldn't find any production cars that were even near the 918's time. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of data at Big Willow. We have a lot on the streets. We have a lot at Laguna Seca, and hopefully we'll do something with those two with this car later. But we don't have a lot to reference it off. So we just started looking at race cars, and this thing stacked up pretty nicely against some race cars with basically racing slicks and no safety requirements for street cars or emissions requirements or anything. This is this is a hybrid that has an Eevee mode, and it's going that fast. It's pretty astounding. Just because it was neat. Johnny Lieberman puts up a Instagram photo of a 918, a 959, and a 911 50th anniversary, and this guy here points out my long-term 328D in the background. 328D, just as cool as a 959 and a 918. We did a photo shoot with this car later on the road out in Palm Springs, and I'll just pretend my thumb isn't there. But just look at the proportions of this car. Isn't that just so beautiful? Man, I just love the detail, everything about the way this car looks. And with the roof off, it's just an experience that makes you smile, even when you're not driving it hard. One thing I forgot to mention is when I was driving it hard in Spain, I was shifting manually, and typically I don't. I just let if the transmission seems to have the logic to give me the shifts I want. I say I'm just going to focus on my line and my brake and my throttle inputs. I'm going to deal with that, let the transmission do it, because the transmission's doing a pretty good job. Driving this car fast, though, I was using the transmission just because I needed the additional reference point for speed. I wanted to make sure, okay, I'm going to enter this corner in third gear because I can't really gauge how fast I'm going. I know I'm going really fast, but I was using the gear change as an additional reference point. Driving it fast in auto is fun too, but that's just how confident I felt in the car that I was looking for ways to measure reference points. I really was seeking that out. And that's a $7 Casio in a $1 million, actually in a $10 million development mule of a $1 million car. I shouldn't find that as funny as I do. So let's talk testing. Acceleration. We've been fortunate enough to do acceleration runs on the Bugatti Veyron, the McLaren P1, and the Porsche 918. Two of those runs, the P1 and 918, were done personally by me. I haven't done an acceleration run in a Veyron, but at this point, doesn't matter because the P1 and the 918 are faster. So despite being 500 pounds or so heavier than the P1, having less power than the P1, the 918's faster to 60 by a insignificant, inconsequential 0.2 tenths of a second. 2.4 seconds, which is a record in our magazine, is a record in our testing, and there's actually a bottleneck forming at 2.4, 2.5, 2.6. You're seeing cars pretty much just stop there. And we're just basically reaching the limits of tires. Tire adhesion, you're looking at 1G, 1.1G. That's kind of what you can get out of a tire. And until you have tires that can give you more grip but also not fall apart at high speed, that's when you'll start seeing acceleration numbers get lower than that. Also, 0 to 60 times, whatever, who cares? They don't really matter. And also, we do we apply rollout to all acceleration runs, and that kind of artificially helps faster cars because they get through that 1 foot so much faster, and so it kind of gives a very inconsequential advantage, but it's one nonetheless. So at about 90 miles an hour, you start seeing the difference in the P1 weight and horsepower, and it gets real significant at 120 or so. That P1 is real fast. 918 real fast too. I mean, 918 does a quarter mile in 10 seconds flat, and the P1 did it in 9.8, I want to say. Their uncorrected times were a little bit like a tenth or two slower. I think 9.9 and 10.2 respectively. Actually, reverse it respectively. But they're real fast, and they're so close to each other that it doesn't matter. I mean, when you're talking tenths of a second, you're talking a 10-second or faster street car. You're not at the drag strip anyway. You're getting kicked off the drag strip, so it doesn't matter. And they knock out these acceleration runs like that. There's no special magic. You hit launch control, you smash the pedals, you let go with the brake, and you just hold on. It's crazy. Production cars are getting real crazy with power. Real crazy. So this is our figure 8 lot, and I put this picture here to illustrate the next picture. So our figure 8, not a lot of people understand it, which is unfortunate, because it's a really cool test. The figure 8 is two 200-foot skid pads, here and here, separated by 500 feet. I just pulled this off Google Maps, and this, you can see, this is literally the parking lot that we do it in, as you can see by all the tire marks. So the figure 8 produces a lap time, a lateral G, and an average G, but it also gives you great seat of the pants sensations for all the different transient stages of a car's handling. Because when you enter this corner here, you're full brake, you turn left, you get the max lateral acceleration you can around this corner before accelerating out full speed, before doing the full braking, the full routine, the opposite direction. You get basically every limit in terms of acceleration on the car that you possibly can. This is actually the best way to draw friction circles of a car. This thing will draw friction circles all day, and if you care or know what a friction circle is, like, that's really cool. Unfortunately, not a lot of people have the time to really research and understand that, so they end up not caring about it. But if you're a real car geek, this is great stuff to pay attention to. Why is this so important? Well, this is the difference in speed versus distance between the 918 and the Viper TA. And I don't choose the Viper TA to pick on it. I choose it because before the 918, it was the second fastest car we'd ever sent around the figure 8. 22.8 seconds. I think I got the figure here. Maybe not. Anyway, the 918 took 22.2 seconds around the figure 8, and I think the Viper TA did 22.9 seconds. Most fast cars are in the 24 to 25 second range. That's a good result for a performance car. When you get into the 22s, you're going real fast. You're basically at the forefront of everything. The former first place was that Corvette Z06 with the Z07 package on cup tires, and I don't have that here because the hardware we use to record that lap time is different than the hardware we use to record the 918 and the Viper TA lap times, and it's kind of a pain to get the graphs on top of one another. But this will suffice because the Z06 was like a tenth faster than the TA, so whatever. And we were talking about lateral limits of cars, or tire limits of cars, and that's what you're seeing here in the corners. So this is the straight, this is the braking, this is corner, straight, braking, corner. And red line is 918, blue line's Viper TA. And the 918 did 1.12 average G laterally, and the TA did 1.10, so 2/100ths of a G average acceleration between the two. Not that far off one another, and that's because, again, unless you have significant downforce, which you need to be at speed to use, or you're in banked corners, you're at essentially what we're finding to be the lateral limit of tires. The difference is, though, the acceleration when you have 800 horsepower. 92 miles an hour on that straight is by far the fastest we have ever seen on a figure 8 course. And it got to the point where it was not scary, but like, holy crap, I need to change everything I know about the braking point on this course because this car is going so fast. So remember at the very beginning we talked about that powered front axle and the options it gives the car in terms of performance driving. Well, when you have the car set up a specific way, you can have the front axle drive the car essentially out of corners while the rear is sliding. If you're in an oversteer situation, you can power the front wheels in a way that makes it correct that. And when we found out the secret of driving this car fast around the figure 8, was induce a little bit of a slide, very small angle, and then roll onto that throttle gradually as you come out of a corner, and it comes out of that corner so freaking fast that it's just insane. You really see the power application, how early that starts right here versus the Viper. There's a little bit of a lift there to probably to fix the slide that was happening, because it does power slide, and then boom, acceleration. There were our video guys, Anthony and Corey, were like feet away from the car as it's flying by, and after I did a few laps, they were like, their jaws were open. They're like, we've never seen a car come around that corner that fast with that kind of acceleration. They could just tell as the car went by, like, whoa, this is another league of performance. And it really is. It absolutely is. We'd love to get a P1. We'd love to get a LaFerrari around this test track, because then you'll really see how these varying powertrain methodologies are used in this specific test. The 19 was just so impressive. And what else do I got? I got this. This is just this makes me laugh. We were doing our photo shoot out in the desert. Mike Schaefer was on. We was doing car-to-car photography, and I just started flipping them off, and he gave me these two pictures, and we turned to a GIF, and it makes me laugh every time I see it. Now, what have I forgotten? I'm sure there's a ton of stuff I've forgotten on this car, just because there's so much to talk about. Like I said, this is such an easy car to geek out over, and I think I might have covered everything I wanted to. Fuel economy, very important. 67 miles per gallon equivalent with the hybrid system, which is like not great for if you're looking at Priuses, but fantastic if you're considering 900 horsepower supercars. I mean, that gas engine alone does 22 miles per gallon, and this thing doesn't get a gas guzzler tax, which is a pretty big deal. And that's kind of going to do it. Like I mentioned before, if you have any questions about anything, if you have any cars you'd like me to cover, message me on various social media outlets, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr. I'm on them all.